Hi class, Rachel Chase here, and in this video we will explore how you can use the calculator technology to find things like your standard deviation and variance, as well as means, and a few other useful tools. So for starters, let's look at the example that we did together in the Chapter 3 lecture. We were dealing with the gross amount earned at a box office. In your graphing calculator, notice the screen right here, your keys should look something like this, whether you have a TI-83 or TI-84. If you press on, there's a stat button. You come up with a whole bunch of options. What we're going to start with is using the edit list. Now, these lists that appear, there's a lot of pretty cool features we have. You could use them even in some ways like a function in Excel if you're familiar with it. However, for purposes of our course, you don't necessarily have to do that, but again, it is an option if you'd like. So if you wanted to enter your data, that's our first step. In this case, we have to clear out what we have. So if you're not yet highlighted, select the column, press clear, and enter, and that'll erase everything that's in the list. What I'm going to do is just repeat this for a few of them, clear out what I have, and go back over to my list 1. For your list 1, what you're going to do is enter each piece of data and press enter in between them. So the first one is 58, 22, 27, 29, and so on and so forth. So I would advise that you do a quick run through just to make sure you didn't skip anything by accident or mistype a number. It does help to do that. Occasionally, if you were to mistype a number, your final answer would be completely wrong, unfortunately. Once you have all of your data in and you've verified that it's correct, use the second and above the word mode you see quit to get back to the main screen of the calculator. For us to find our mean and of course other things, you're going to use the stat menu again, and under the calculate menu, let's use the right arrow to go over, we have a few options here. We have 1var stats and 2var stats. For most of what we do, at least until we get towards the end of the course, we'll only be using 1var stats, and that stands for one variable statistic. We're only dealing with one set of data, hence one variable. What you want to do is tell it where you entered your information. We used list 1, so press second, and above the number 1 is L1. And in this case, there is no frequency list. This is a single set of data, so clear out anything that might be there. Then move on to calculate. So one thing I want to point out here is if you're using an older model of calculator, when you select 1var stats, you will just type the L1 next to it. It'll come up like this instead of with a menu. Now there's a few things on this list that are of importance to us. First and foremost, you'll see the mean. Below that you'll see standard deviations, but there's 2 of them. So something you have to be mindful of here is when you're dealing with the calculator function, you'll notice it only gives you one mean, and even though it says x bar, if you had population data, you need to assume that that's mu for population population mean. You cannot assume always that that's the correct symbol. So for simplicity's sake, that will always say x bar, but it's up to you to identify which one it is. This problem is actually a sample. So that 16.357, which same thing we had here, 16.4 rounded, would be our correct answer. And although it didn't ask for it, how about the standard deviation? If this is sample data and we wanted the standard deviation, we're going to select the SX, which stands for sample standard deviation. Sigma X stands for the population standard deviation. This is what we discussed the other day, and that if you use the calculator technology and you select the wrong one, if there is no work to back up how you got your answer, then you would lose full credit. So if partial credit is a concern of yours, then I would advise that you show the steps to calculating those things. Another tool we can use, still with 1var stats, is if you had something like grouped data. So with our group data example, go back into your stat edit function. I'm going to go ahead and clear out my list. like I did before. And the calculator is unable to read intervals, but you can instead put the midpoints in. So start by putting in those midpoints. Once you have each of your midpoints entered, you're going to go over to the next available list and plug in each of their respective frequencies. So for the first midpoint, that's a 3. We have 15, 22, 8, and 2. So if you recall, when we used the OneVarstats menu, it asked us for the frequency list. So here, if we have 2 columns worth of information, whatever the second column is would be your frequency list. We have our midpoints in list 1, and we put our frequencies in list 2. So when I calculate, it looks something like this. We've identified that this is in fact sample data, so our sample mean is 95.9, which is what we had. And then again, if we wanted our sample standard deviation, we would select SX. If it was a population, you would select sigma x. Now, one thing you might have noticed from the formula sheet is that any group data is only ever standard deviation of x, so do keep that in mind. One other useful tool here is if you scroll down in this list, you'll notice it gives us actually a 5-point summary. So at the end of chapter 3, when we talk about box plots, you can use the calculator to acquire the 5-point summary for you. Now keep in mind it looks a little funny because we wouldn't necessarily find a box plot for a frequency distribution. However, it's the same downward scroll to get that information. As far as the tricks in the calculator go for this section, that's really about it. If you have any, troubleshooting questions or concerns, you're welcome to drop a message here or send me an email or when we meet in class. Really, everything we do for the next few weeks at least, we will only be using this portion of the calculator. Once we get into the later parts of the course, there's a lot more to do. One last thing I want to show you is that if you were dealing with that group data and you have an older model calculator, see how we have L1, L2? It'll appear as such, and then when you press enter, it brings up the same thing that the calculate menu did. All right, thanks for watching.